And you can see my slides, correct?
Yes, it's correct.
Good. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Michael, and I'm really pleased to be doing this webinar today and to share with you my experiences of the compassion research field and how this fits with virtual reality and with ProReal. So my job at the moment at the University of Nottingham is to really work to identify unmet needs in mental health and how those unmet needs can be met by digital technology. Of course, that would be virtual reality in my case. I also work in the field of compassion research and how compassion is associated with mental health, mental well-being and mental health problems, and so I'm really combining the two. So I'll take you through some of the theories of compassion and compassion-focused therapy. So I work quite closely with Paul Gilbert, who's in Derby. I'll take you through very briefly some of my own research at when I was at UCL, and then briefly about what I'm doing at the moment with ProReal. So the first thing to really, get to grips with is what is compassion. So a lot of people kind of get confused as to what compassion is, and they think that it's kindness, and of course kindness is a really, really important part of that, but it's not everything. So you can be kind by remembering someone's birthday, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a compassionate act. Other people get it confused with pity, for example, but this is more associated with looking down on someone, with perhaps feelings of disdain, and the motivation behind a helping behaviour coming from pity is very different from that just coming from compassion. So the basic definition of compassion is that it is a sensitivity to the suffering of the self and others, which is importantly accompanied by a desire and a commitment to try and alleviate and prevent that suffering. So this is quite a complex process of cognition, behaviour and emotion that involves things like empathy, distress tolerance, motivation to engage with whatever it is that you're feeling with, and suffering with. You have to have courage, because to do that is not easy. It's very difficult and can be in itself a very painful thing. You need to have wisdom, so you need to know how to try and alleviate and prevent suffering, and then obviously acts of kindness and generosity. And that can be both in the inter and intrapersonal spheres, so being compassionate towards other people as well as being compassionate towards yourself. Now that definition is kind of split into two psychologies. So the first is the intention and the act of turning towards and engaging with suffering, so your own suffering or the suffering of someone else, rather than turning away from that suffering or trying to disassociate yourself from that suffering, which, like I say, takes a lot of courage. So a lot of people think that being kind towards yourself or even being kind towards other people is sort of a sign of weakness, where indeed it's actually a sign of strength and requires a lot of courage and wisdom. The second part of the compassion kind of process is the intention to acquire knowledge. You need knowledge to be able to alleviate your stress. You need strategies. You need to learn those strategies to alleviate pain, suffering, and also the ability to act on that wisdom. And so the key thing here is actually to disassociate the idea or the definition of compassion from emotion, because what compassion is it's a motivation, and I'll touch upon that later on. So what does the research tell us at the moment? Well, I kind of come into this from the angle of self-criticism in mental health and the role that that plays. So we know that self-criticism plays a really important role in the maintenance of mental health problems, of course the development as well, and also it plays a really important role in relapse too. Converse to this, people who are really high in self-compassion are, they have better mental as well as physical well-being. They're better able to cope in the face of stress and negative life events, and there's some evidence to suggest that these people are more motivated and productive in the workplace as well, which kind of makes sense if you're better able to cope with stress. So self-compassion is one way that we can kind of buffer. It's like a natural buffer to combat self-criticism. And really with these Paul Gilbert has developed compassion-focused therapy. So it's sort of a bit like a third wave kind of CBT approach, but it's, as you can imagine, trying to cultivate compassion for the self and others, and trying to cultivate a compassionate mindset. And this sort of has a three-pronged approach to it. So it's being able to give compassion towards yourself, so self-soothing, as well as giving compassion towards other people, and also being open towards receiving compassion. So in the poll we saw that quite a lot of people scored highly on being compassionate towards other people, but they were lower in being compassionate towards themselves. And this is quite a common thing because it's okay to be kind to other people, but not to be kind to the self. So this is what Paul Gilbert's compassion-focused therapy is really about developing, and it's drawn from Buddhist psychology, but it's really within an evolutionary and developmental psychology framework. So as a part of the therapy process, there's a very large psychoeducational component of this that I think is a wonderful way to de-shame, and that's really the concept of the fact that our brains are really, really tricky. So our brains have evolved over millennia, particularly within evolution of the mammalian brain. And this sort of process has left us with a brain that is not quite suited to our current culture or our society today. So the brain has evolved these essentially three systems, which of course is an oversimplification, but it's actually quite a nice working model. So there's these three systems which I'll talk about more in a minute, but these systems, one of which is a threat system, so this is kind of your fight or flight system. And what this would have evolved to deal with is lions on the savannah, for example. But what it's having to deal with now is social threat, so being rejected by other people or me in the minds of other people, which plays a huge role in mental health problems. Now the compassion-focused therapy is also concerned with allowing people to identify or be mindful of multiple parts of themselves. So we all have internal monologues for sure, but we also have different roles. So I have a role as an academic, I have a role as a daughter, I have a role as a partner. And Paul Gilbert conceptualizes this within social mentality theory. And what that says is each kind of social role that you have comes with its own set of motivations, which comes with its own set of behaviors, thoughts and feelings. And they can also conflict with one another. So through the process of cultivating a compassionate mind, you can be able to identify those and sort of have use your compassionate side to kind of mediate those or mitigate those relationships. Now I mentioned before these kind of three models, and this is a really, really common model within compassion-focused therapy, and it's actually a really nice kind of working model to show clients as well. So these three systems have evolved, like I've said, and then they're also fine-tuned during development. So I mentioned before the threat system, so this is fight or flight, so it's about protection, it's about anger, power, fear, and it's quite automatic. And then you have the drive system, which is really concerned with, well, originally it would be concerned with obtaining food, shelter, sex, water, etc. And so it's really the wanting system, the desire system, pleasure, achieving. So this is me wanting to do well at work or me wanting things to succeed in my life and finding ways to try and achieve that. And then you have what's called the soothing system, and this is really the affiliate system, and is really fine-tuned when we're growing up with our parents and our external stimuli, and it's about creating a sense of calm. As it says on the tin, it's about soothing and being able to provide reassurance and, importantly, safety, so this idea of safety, and being content. So the compassion-focused therapy is about kind of stimulating and activating the soothing system, because all these systems interact with one another. So the threat system, as you can imagine, if you're thinking about anxiety, for example, this could be really hyperactive, hypervigilant, and be trying to upregulate the drive system to try and alleviate that anxiety. And in the meantime, it's going to try and suppress the soothing system because it's got stuff to do, and this is life or death kind of situations. So what the compassion-focused therapy tries to do is to kind of upregulate the soothing system so that the other systems can work in harmony or work more adaptively. And these kind of images at the sides are perhaps demonstrations of the different kind of balances between the three systems. So if you look down in the bottom left, you've got a really active threat system and an active drive system, and your soothing system is quite small. This one here, the threat system is so active that you just can't do anything about it. So you just shut down. Your drive system just shuts down, and your soothing system is also underactive. And then if you look to the right hand side of the screen, so people with a kind of balanced or a sort of well-formed, so to speak, soothing system is it's sort of down-regulated threat system. It's being soothed by the soothing system, and also the drive system it may be quite active, but the motivations behind whatever drive we're trying to achieve would be compassion orientated. Okay, so it's just a really nice illustration of the sort of evolutionary and developmental aspects of it, and how this can fit into individual clients' understanding of themselves in certain situations. Now, the compassion-focused therapy process, like I say, is a huge psychoeducational component, and this is also about addressing quite a big problem, which is a fear of compassion for other people, a fear of compassion for the self, and a fear of receiving compassion from other people. Now, this is one of the key mitigating factors for compassion-focused therapy, so it needs to be talked about, and if people are still struggling with it, then it needs to go through a process of formulation, looking at their fears and how they're fit with core beliefs and safety strategies and things. People have a fear of compassion for very different reasons. It could be that they feel like they don't deserve compassion. They feel that maybe their self-criticism or the fact that they're harsh on themselves keeps them going, keeps them on track. Or some people just have negative experiences with compassion-related emotions or thoughts because of past relationships that they've had that should have represented an affiliative relationship and actually turned out to be quite a negative experience. So, like I say, huge psychoeducational component, de-shaming, and this is usually followed by rhythmic breathing, so a guided exercise in slowing the breath, and this is about engaging the nervous system and calming the threat system down a little bit before you start the compassion imagery. So the compassion imagery, so this is all pretty much mental imagery work, so mind in the eye, mind in the eye in the mind. And it's about trying to develop a compassionate other, a compassionate self, and also giving compassion, receiving compassion from other people. So the process is usually trying to imagine yourself at your compassionate best. So this is imagining myself with the qualities of kindness, of love, of my desire to be helpful and supportive, of confidence, of strength, authority, of course wisdom, a sort of non-judgmental stance as well, and a commitment to the person that you're interacting with or to yourself. And there's a really strong interplay here between your thoughts, your simulations in your mind-eye, and the body. So you're constantly reminded about, well, try and think about how this manifests itself as a facial expression, manifests itself in the posture. So if you're thinking about authority, how does this affect your posture? I think about the tone of your voice, and also during the process think about what the soothing does to your visceral sensations, your anxiety, these sort of things. And then it's about focusing that. So it's about focusing and directing it towards, for example, someone you know who is suffering, and you do that process and experience that in your mind's eye. And then the next step is to internalize that, to direct it towards the self. And like anything else, it's about practice. So the more you practice, the more you can kind of access these qualities within you. They come more quickly to mind. And it makes it easier for them to act through you. Now, that's just a very, very, very brief summary of the therapy process, but if you're interested in any of this, there's free resources at the Compassionate Mind Foundation. The website's on there, and I think we're going to give it to you at the end. So there's free audio, free videos, free scales and measures and things like that on there, and that's the foundation that was created by Professor Paul Gilbert, who created the compassion-focused therapy. Now, just to try and demonstrate this idea of cultivating a compassionate mind and motivation and how that comes with its own sort of thoughts and behaviours. I just want to do a very brief sort of thought experiment with you now and just try and answer these questions as I kind of go along. So we have two people. So the first person is a person who is completely motivated to get on in the world, to make as much money as possible, regardless of other people, and is really only interested in themselves. Okay. Now ask yourself this. What does this person pay attention to, and what do they focus their minds on? What do they value in life, and what gives them meaning? What excites them? Importantly, what threatens them? How do they nurture themselves? How do they see and behave towards other people? How do other people see and relate to them? The point of this example is really to kind of show that a person's motivation shapes the way that they think, the way they feel, and the way that they behave, and consequently how they interact with the world and how the world interacts with them. Okay? And now compare this to person two. So this person takes a genuine interest in their own well-being and the well-being of others. They enjoy sharing and working, helping with others. Now ask yourself the question, what does this person pay attention to and focus on? What gives them value in life? What gives them meaning? What excites them? What threatens them? How do they nurture themselves? How do they see and relate to other people? And how do other people see and relate to them? And once again, this person's motivation in life to be good and helpful to other people influences the way that they behave, the way they think, and the way that they feel, and how they interact with other people and how other people interact with them. And I think that's the overall aim of compassion-focused therapy. So while I think it's an incredibly useful thing, and there's a lot of face value to this, and certainly the people that I interact with really kind of grab on to the very simple idea of being kind towards yourself. But it also offers an aspirational component to develop the self within this framework. And it not only benefits the self, but it benefits other people as well. So I suppose by now you might be asking, okay, great, compassion-focused therapy, it works quite well, it works in a range of mental health problems because compassion and self-criticism are called transdiagnostic. But there are some problems with it. Like I've mentioned before, it's people have a fear of compassion. It's a really strong mitigating factor in the success of the therapy. But most importantly, people really struggle with imagery. Okay, so it's difficult. You need motivation to do it. It's difficult to maintain over time, and everybody's experience is different, you know, from one to the next. So it's different within and between people, and some just sort of lack any kind of insightful impact from it. And you know, you have other people as well who have their imagery attempts kind of thwarted by the fact that they actually don't have any compassionate experiences to draw upon, which is incredibly sad but true. And really I think virtual reality can help here. It can help people here not only because it involves an embodied experience, which I'll touch upon in a minute, but you know, you get rid of the imagery problem because you have a constant visual input. It also provides people with an opportunity who haven't experienced compassion before in their lives to experience it in different types of scenarios in the virtual reality, which maybe they could then take into imagery or take with them through their everyday lives to kind of remember and recall what compassion is really about. And also what I think is quite interesting, and it relates to mental health as well, is the fact that in a virtual reality you can lock or you can manipulate a first-person perspective, or indeed any perspective, first, third, or a bird's-eye view perspective. Now there's some research showing that when you recall an event, so an autobiographical event, an event that you were involved in, when you try and recall this, so I mean we could do it now, so try and think about what you had for breakfast this morning and really picture it in your mind's eye. Picture yourself having the experience of breakfast. Okay, so have you done it? Okay, what was your perspective in that recall of breakfast? Were you re-experiencing breakfast from a first-person perspective, so through your own eyes, you could see your breakfast in front of you, or were you viewing it from a third-person perspective, so were you in the image? You could see yourself sitting at the table having breakfast. Now what the research is showing is that depending on the type of perspective that you take can lead to a different interpretation of the event. So having a third person perspective for some may be a distancing, so they don't feel as much, or it means people take a slightly more analytical stance, whereas people who have a first person perspective, the experience tends to be a lot more sensory laden, it's more vivid, more emotions. But if you're thinking about self-criticism and how that relates to a sort of analytical stance, then you might run into problems there. And so I think the virtual reality is a really good way to kind of look at that, manipulate it, and sort of fix it. So I've talked about embodiment before. So one of the really nice things about using mental imagery is that it's basically a process of simulation. So when you try and recall what you're going to have for dinner tonight, you may start salivating. When you recall a crappy event that happened last week, you may feel rubbish, and you get a simulation of the kind of self-criticism and the sad feelings, the shame that you had. So there's a real manifestation of whatever you're recalling in your mind's eye within the body. But virtual reality offers a different type of embodiment experience because you can actually do something, or you can watch a representation of yourself on the screen. So my experience before in virtual reality has been slightly different from ProReal. We've used immersive virtual reality, which is participants wearing a head-mounted display where they can see the virtual environment, and they literally step into the shoes of an avatar. Okay, so this means that when I move my physical body, the body of the avatar moves. Okay, and when you spend a little bit of time like this sort of builds up a sense of self-identification with, and a sense of localization within the avatar, and also senses of ownership. I own that avatar and I control it as well. And okay, ProReal isn't immersive, but you'd still get the self-identification with and a sense of ownership and agency over the avatars that you're building in ProReal. And we know from the literature as well that this sort of embodiment phenomenon can be really powerful in terms of the way that it affects behavior, emotion, and thoughts. So if you were to embody a child avatar, for example, the research is showing that your cognition shifts towards something more akin to being a child. If you are white and you embody a black avatar, for example, then this results in reduced racial biases. So this field is very ripe for research, and there's not that much done on it, but you can see how it's potentially very, very powerful. And this is the type of virtual reality that we used at UCL, and I just want to show you a very, very brief video of what this feels like. So this is me in the head-mounted display, and I have a suit on, and this tracks my motion, and what that does is it superimposes my body movement onto the avatar, which I can see through the head-mounted display. And the bottom left hand of the screen is what I see, and you can see the synchrony between my physical movements and the movements of my avatar. So it's just a very short video, there's no audio. So I can look around, have quite a degree of movement there. And this is a virtual mirror that I'm looking at, and I can see my virtual body in the mirror. Great. And I just want to talk very briefly about the type of compassion paradigm that that we used at virtual reality and some of the results. So what we did is we had participants come in, and in image A here at the top left-hand corner, the participant got the head-mounted display on and his body trackers, and she's seated opposite a chair. Now we gave our participants a very brief psychoeducation about how to be compassionate towards other people. We gave them some lines to say. And then in the virtual reality, they had to comfort an upset crying child, which is in image B here on the top right. And this child got better as they gave compassionate responses. And then we split the groups up into two. So one group in the second part of the experiment got to embody the child. And while they were embodied as the child, they got to re-experience their compassionate response from the perspective of the child. So they saw their original adult avatar, they heard their own voice, and they saw their own body movements. in the other group, they didn't get to embody the child, they didn't get to embody anything actually. What they viewed is the exchange from a third person perspective, okay? And the results from that were really interesting. So what we found for both of these groups is a reduction in self-criticism. So this is a reduction in self-criticism from time point 1 to time point 2 after the virtual reality scenario. But importantly, we found only an increase in self-compassion for the groups in the first-person perspective condition. And what we think is going on here, and what we try to achieve with the virtual reality, is this sort of unique self-to-self situation. So I am me as the child, but that's also me as the adult, and that's my voice, that's my body movement. So you have this kind of unique self-to-self situation where I'm giving compassion towards myself, and what we found is an increase in self-compassion after that process. In another study we wanted to look at the kind of longitudinal effect of this, and so we had participants do repeated sessions, so we had just 3 sessions actually, and then we looked at 1 month follow-up, and again we found sort of an entrenched effect of this increase in self-compassion. But what we found, and what's really interesting, is we found changes in trait levels of self-criticism, so the reduction in trait self-criticism, and fears of compassion as well, which is really, really important. So that's really changing personality traits, which is quite outstanding because, you know, the paradigm wasn't long, so it's about a minute giving and a minute receiving, so 2 minutes, and you're getting these kind of effects, which is really, really encouraging. But of course we wanted to see what it was like for depressed volunteers, and so we did it again, and we did some follow-ups, and we found similar results. So we find increases in self-compassion, reductions in self-criticism, but importantly decreases in depression. So what we were doing in the virtual reality is interacting with their traditional therapy in some way, and is improving their depression scores. So, but I also wanted to kind of share some really, really nice subjective experiences of people in the depression study, and this sort of really illustrates, I think, what we're trying to do, and it's really encouraging actually. So the first one says, you know, the virtual reality allows you to step outside of yourself, to apply yourself and bear witness to yourself. The virtual reality provides insight into the relationship that you have with yourself. The experience has taught me that we are all human and vulnerable, and it's okay to be vulnerable as an adult. It wasn't all positive. Every single person said that the kind of scenario, the situation was awkward, it's cheesy, it was a bit strange, and it was. And also every single person said that they felt hearing their voice was horrible, it was strange, it was really cringy. But in spite of this, we found the results, and also we found that every single participant said that they would continue with the virtual reality experiences if there were different scenarios, and if the scenarios were perhaps more tailored towards individual needs. And this is quite nice. So we just got hot off the press. I only managed to pull out a couple of quotes from a study that ProReal are doing with kids down at the University of Roehampton with humanistic counselling, and these similar kind of self-referential comments are coming out. So one, for example, said that the virtual reality helped them see the impact of themselves, and also, you know, they're saying that it's easier to express myself with the ProReal instead of just using words all the time. So again, it's sort of building evidence for our hypothesis that imagery or just talking therapies could really be augmented or assisted or even replaced perhaps by virtual reality. Now, what are we doing now? Well, my colleagues at UCL are trying to get some funding to continue our immersive work and build a sort of suite of scenarios. But in the meantime, here at the University of Nottingham, I'm working with ProReal again to develop some protocols around self-compassion and identifying multiple selves in depression, but also in a couple of other clinical populations. So what I'm really interested in doing is sort of identifying the kind of internal monologues that we have. So they may be shame, self-criticism, despair, sort of extracting them, personifying them out, and in avatars, and really within a compassionate mind frame from psychoeducation, and in the presence of a compassionate avatar, sort of trying to address some of these issues. And I think that's it so far. So just before I pass you over to David, who's going to try and illustrate some of these points in ProReal, I just want to thank my collaborators at UCL and also my funders at UCL and here at the University of Nottingham as well. So thank you very much for your attention. And I have just thrown a lot of information at you, so maybe some time to digest perhaps.